Welcome, Tyson, and thank you so much for coming and talking to us here at Kindred.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
So I want to introduce everyone to your work. And so I have two questions that go together to kind of get us started. And the first one is, I'd like for you to tell everybody, how did you write the book Sand Talk? Because that's a great story that leads into the Indigenous Worldview. And then I'd just like for you to help us out with the difference between Indigenous Worldview and Indigenous knowledge.
Well, how I wrote it was, I didn't really mean to write it. It was, I don't know, about 20 years of yarns with lots of interesting people. And, and I guess over the previous 2 years, I've been carving all the knowledge from those yarns into different objects, traditional objects, like I make boomerangs and spears and, didgeridoos and shields and all the things. But, that they're more than decorations. These things carry knowledge, and so that's how I store all the memories of these things. And I usually carve things before I write them. I hadn't thought about writing this stuff down. It was mostly the things I was doing with young people and people in need, and passing on all this knowledge to next generation and to people who needed it. And particularly Old Man Juma, who I talk about quite a bit in the book, he'd passed on these sort of really sacred symbols to me, and he wanted me to spread it to as many people as possible, these things, because he has that belief that people just seeing these images, and particularly seeing them and hearing a little bit of story with them, or a little bit of explanation with them, that will change people at the molecular level, will change people at the level of their DNA, and make big ripples in the world. So I was just doing that one-on-one with people, and then I crashed my car and I couldn't get around, so I needed to buy a new car, and there were a publisher contacted me and said, "Oh, can you write us a manuscript? I'll give you $5,000 advance if you can get a manuscript to me." And so I said, well, yes. And because I really needed the 5,000, because I needed to get a new car. And so I wrote the book in about 2 weeks, just writing it from these objects. And that was it. Then I sent it off. He said it'd be really limited. There probably wouldn't be very many people who'd read it, because it's a first book and all that sort of thing. But it sort of struck a chord with people. We didn't do much marketing or anything like that, but word of mouth got around and people started reading it. And so here I am. And you only get half the advance up front, though, by the way. So I had to get like a $2,000 car at the time instead. But that really did save my life at the time, because I couldn't get to work. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's how it happened. It's pretty mundane kind of story, really, isn't it?
It is not. I am
guy needs a car, guy writes a book.
Yeah, well, that part maybe, but the book is not at all. The book is extraordinary, and I almost gave up with the whole. I'm pretty hard on books, especially ones that set my hair on fire. So the dog earing, underlying, noting. I went through this book and I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be a mess by the time I get done working my way through it. But it is extraordinary, and it is really, really helpful to me. And I think a lot of people, it is striking a chord. I know you were just in the United States, by the way, for a couple of events and I think awards. So that must have been interesting. Was your trip okay? I'm going to lead up to that story about.
It was really hard.
It was hard. Okay.
Like, autistic toddlers and a wife with a broken knee, and just sort of dragging them around on multiple local flights all over the US was not easy. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I hope the things I was saying there made some sense, because I was kind of just sleepwalking through it. But
Well,
yeah, it was an amazing trip though, because I like spending time with Native American and Native Canadian people, and doing some ceremony with them, and just sort of connecting that way and understanding Turtle Island better. It was really exciting.
well, I got to see the presentation at Cornell on Zoom. They let us come in the classroom and sit. It looked like a student lecture hall you were presenting to. And so I got to, and I thought it was really interesting that you started off with some kind of baptism by fire by telling the story of going out on your first retreat. I mean, this is in case people haven't heard Tyson Yunkaporta speak before on Indigenous Worldview and Practices. But the story you told of the first time you were in the US and you went out on a retreat and you got where you're going, and the vegans made allowances for the meat eaters. You can tell it if you want to, but I saw you telling that story to the students, and I thought, this is how he's starting off. This is great.
I like to start with something unforgivable, like, just because I do so much speaking, it's like, just to keep myself interested. After a while, I like to just say something unforgivable right at the start, and then challenge myself to win them back over the next hour.
Oh no, you had me. The story is you went out, you got there, and you went, and they didn't have meat, and then what happened?
Yeah, there was almost no meat. It was so I was doing I was doing some work for an impact investing company there, and so I didn't really see New York. I was just like motel office, airport, but they had a retreat right in the middle of it over a weekend, and they drove somewhere. I don't even know where it was. Somewhere in the forest in New York State, like a couple of hours out of the city. And it was on this sort of big private lake. Yeah, and whoever did the shopping, like the catering for the thing, it must have been a vegan, because there was nothing. There was no meat. Well, there wasn't enough meat anyway. Yeah. So yeah, so I went hunting to get some meat. Yeah, which was, I mean, I don't know, it was just funny, because it's not like I had any guns or spears or anything there. But it turns out that the megafauna in the United States is a lot softer than the stuff than the ones we have in Australia. I've never hunted a deer before. They're a hell of a lot easier than kangaroos. So all I needed was like 2 rocks, and so yeah, I just stunned it with the first rock and then finished it off with the other one. While all these sort of business people are looking on, like at first in horror and then just absolute fascination. And it turned out, then it was like the whole program went out the window. All the, I don't know what they had planned, like trust falls or something, like the usual corporate retreat, breath work or whatever, that was gone. Because then it was just, we spent the rest of the day just skinning, gutting, and butchering this deer carcass. And most of them had never, not all of them, they'd never seen anything like that before. They'd never seen that done. And it was just I don't know, it was kind of magical. They were looking at, oh my God, that the guts are so beautiful. It's like a bag of jewels or something. And it's shining, and we're watching that sort of rainbow shine that's, indescribable. It's in all the intestines, watching that because they're still living, after the animals died, and you can see the rainbow shine in the intestines. And as they gradually die, you see that shine disappear. So you can see the spirit gradually leaving the animal that way, which is a bit of a minor miracle in itself. And, and just all the, I guess, the problem solving that because it was me and another Aboriginal fella, Gamilaroi fellow, that were doing the hunting. Well, I did the hunting part. He did he helped me with the tracking part and figuring out all the the place and whether it would be all right for us to do this, and with the traditional owners there and all that. And yeah, and then he and I were just going through all this problem solving because we'd never butchered a deer before, plenty of kangaroos and wallabies and all that kind of thing, but possums, etc., but never a deer. So we were trying to figure out all the, the anatomy of this deer and where we'd need to cut and all that kind of thing. Yeah, and then it was several hours in the kitchen with everybody. All the people at the retreat, they're all collaborating to cook, different dishes with this deer. And it was interesting. Even the vegans were eating the meat that day.
Oh my gosh.
Because it was just so special,
Wow.
Anyway, yeah. So, but I wanted to, because I didn't, on that trip, it was only for a week and it was only in an office. So I hadn't met any of the, the actual owners of the land. Yeah, I hadn't met any of the traditional owners there, Native American. And so, I was kind of offering it as I'm not sure if this is a thank you or a sorry that I need to offer for killing one of your deer. Yeah. Anyway, I opened with that, but as you know, at the time, it was a shorter and more brutal version of the story that I told there. And
you talk about how it takes 12 hours, or it took 12 hours to connect with the land, and
yeah,
piece of it, and biodynamic farming and cattle raising, they butcher animals, but they wait for the animal to step forward and before that process begins. It's a very sacred
that's
process.
It. Well, you've got to come into country the right way. Of course, there's protocols that you have to do, politically and socially, which we weren't able to do those because nobody was there and we didn't have time to find people and talk to them. But we were, yeah, it was about 12 hours just coming into the place and making sense of it and connecting with the place. And, when you come into country and you're not related, you're not in relation with it yet, it's closed to you, which is why I think a lot of non-Indigenous people will, go hiking or something like that. And it's kind of, they're seeing wilderness or waste land, it's kind of, there's not much going on. They might see some birds or, but it's kind of outside of them. And the country just closes itself to you. And it doesn't show you anything. Everything hides from you. Even the plants just seem to close up and they're not very bright. They'll just cloak themselves. So it was like that at first, and it took some time until we were calling out to the old people there and letting them know our names and doing some things at the water to make sure they knew our smell and were bringing happy for us to be there. And it takes time. You've got to wait then. And eventually there was a couple of snakes came out of the reeds by the lake. There's a brown snake and a black snake. And so we shared like our two snake stories and things like that there. And there was a Hindu fella there as well, and he was sharing snake story. And so we were all talking like that and yarning up these things and, calling out to the old people. And I think it was the snakes that did it because it kind of opened up to us then, the place. Frogs came out of the reeds. there were geese who we hadn't seen yet, these big, beautiful geese. They came out from hiding in the reeds and started paddling on the lake. Fish started jumping, all over the place. It was like, I don't know, like a celebration. The country opened up. And so then we were able to perceive all the game trails and all these sorts of things, and observing where the, fox and dog scat was, which is always, with your wind currents and stuff like that. That always indicates, which way the animals travel on the game trails, all that sort of thing. And just started to come into country and read country in that way. And so then we were able to walk through and, and until we saw this sort of deer. Yeah. And, and at first we just went, geez, it'd be good if we could get that. And then, but it didn't feel right. So, we just watched it until it ran off. And so it ran off, and then we went all around just mapping out where all the water was going and coming into the spirit of the place. And we went right around, and we were heading back to the camp there, and the deer was there again, and it was just standing there. So I went and sat by the lake for a minute, and I'm is this real? Is this okay? Can we do this? And I came back and went, yeah, we're going to do it. So, and he was still there, standing the same place. So I just picked up a couple of rocks and just boom, nailed it. So I don't know why all these Americans need like AR-15s to hunt deer. They're very soft little things. It's just one little rock, behind the ear, and they're done. It's I don't know why. Yeah. I don't understand this obsession with Second Amendment and the selective sort of reading of it. It's like, yeah, it also says, well-regulated militia. Well-regulated militia people, read your goddamn Constitution. I don't think any of these people are keen to have their militias regulated.
They're not. And since you're going down that road, let's just keep going down the road of violence and culture, because in the book you talk about weapons and how different it is in the Aboriginal culture. Now that women, everybody has a stick, everybody has the capacity to defend themselves, I guess, or dig a hole, or there are lots of different
or defend their dignity,
defend their dignity,
their sovereignty,
yeah,
like aggressively. Not even defend, but to assert their sovereignty. So everybody has access to the means of violence, conflict, even like disabled people. I mean, I've got a nephew with cerebral palsy. He can barely walk, but he's a good fighter. Everybody fights. That sounds like a horribly violent and savage culture, but it's, but there's a difference between sneaky domestic violence behind closed doors, which is, against our law, but still happens a lot, in the contemporary context. That's a big problem. So it's important to assert that as well. But yeah, your traditional public violence is always transparent and rule governed and in front of everybody. It's out in the open. There's usually, 50 to 100 spectators who are also, adjudicating. There's really strong rules. You can't, if someone gets knocked down, you can't continue. There's no dirty fighting, hair pulling, or anything like that. And it's very rare that anybody actually gets hurt in these fights. And most of those fights, like about 60 to 70%, is women doing those fights. So it's kind of a very different culture of violence, particularly the gendered nature of violence. I did just publish a paper on this, by the way. We did a research study. Yeah, we were, it was kind of reverse anthropology. So we were applying our rules of social violence, our Aboriginal rules of social violence, to observations of settler violence. Settler on settler violence, we called it, because they're always talking about black on black violence. So anyway, so we did the paper on the settler on settler violence. So we did like a review of 100 street fight videos on YouTube from half a dozen different colonies around the planet, including Taiwan, etc. So it wasn't just white people, you know. We even looked at Israel, like, you know, Australia, US, Canada, New Zealand, etc. And yeah, so, and we evaluated all those street fights using our rules and protocols, you know, governing public violence. So we evaluated them in those terms. And what was really interesting was the gendered nature of violence that came out, and the way people policed women to make sure that women could never be active participants in the violence. They're allowed to adjudicate or be like cheerleaders, etc. But if any woman ever stepped outside of that role and tried to join in the fight, then all these men who were deadly enemies, we kept seeing it time and time again. Like, you'd see deadly enemies trying to kill each other, and then but a woman would try and join in, and suddenly they band together like brothers to prevent her from participating. It was really interesting. Yeah, so that's what sort of came out of that study. There were a lot of, but also another finding that came out of it was that, I mean, we expected the non-Aboriginal violence to be really lawless. Our assumption was, you know, settlers have got nothing. They don't they don't have any protocol. But it turned out we were seeing like an adherence to a lot of our rules like quite regularly, you know, and that there is a social cohesion kind of drive, you know, behind a lot of the street fights that you see, and they are quite rule governed, and you know, they're there for to resolve things and promote social cohesion and all this sort of stuff. Except for when you know, whenever you see weird, like really toxic misogyny and white supremacy, like expressions of white supremacy and extreme racism and that kind of thing, we found that those ones where that was involved, that it was just completely lawless, and you know, people are stomping on each other's heads while they're unconscious on the ground and all that kind of weird stuff, you know, which was pretty bloody disturbing to see.
Let me just say back to you what you just said, because I read this part and I read it again because I thought, exactly what you just said, how is this going to play out in settler countries, colonized countries? Oh, my thought was, no way, we don't have the community cohesion for a group of people to stand around, adjudicate what's going on, as you're saying, and take the whole event to some higher ground and the violence expressed there. You can talk about that in just a moment, how that's a part of you know, acknowledgement of how creation works. But the other piece was like you said, if things started to go outside the rails, the shaming would work. And I wondered, is that that just didn't sound like there would be a capacity in colonized cultures for any of that coherence or for shaming to work anymore. But you're saying it does. I think that's actually good news.
Where relationships and cohesion are present, you know, and strong, you can see those things emerging, and the capacity for shame as an effective governance mechanism. You can see that there. I mean, it's not as strong, but it's present. It's measurable and discernible. But yeah, where that's very weak or it's not present, then there is no shame. And this isn't because of, you know, like Western culture or anything like this. it's more of an economic imperative than a cultural one. That individualism, that Margaret Thatcher, there is no society, only individuals. That demand of the marketplace for every person to be an individual that's out for themselves. It's because the aggregate of all those individual needs creates this egregore of the invisible hand of the marketplace that guides all, which is like one of the most ridiculous mythologies I've ever heard. And most of us are not on board with that because we need to relate, because we're freaking human, but it's there, and all of us need to comply with it to some extent. Colonizers and colonized both, in order to survive and make sure that you have shelter and food for your children and things like that. You need to adopt a lot of this rampant individualism, which makes you unaccountable, because you can't feel shame. Like, shame is a collective thing. Shame is a relational thing, and it's something that is supposed to be very hard, that you go through, but others go through with you. There's this kind of collective shame. It's not this singling people out for punishment and shaming them, and they're banished forever kind of thing. That's not what that is. But it's also not the individualized version, which is just guilt, where it's up to you to turn your introspection on yourself, to turn your attention inwards and self-examine, and come up with your apology, and come up with your what you're going to change about yourself. This personal development paradigm that's part of that sort of individualized economy, and it's part of that whole self-management side of neoliberalism. That's just guilt, and there's loopholes in there. You can hack that. You can perform guilt and then move on. There isn't a proper shame sort of mechanism where you're supported, where others are feeling shame. Others who are close to you are also feeling that shame with you. There isn't that collective sort of interdependent shame that you have in more cohesive communities.
Is there a
this is the reason why we have a lot of private violence problems in the contemporary Aboriginal community here too. That's the reason we have a lot of domestic violence is happening. Sometimes, like, I think for Aboriginal women, it's something like 36 times more likely to be a victim of domestic violence than non-Aboriginal women. There's a caveat to that too, because it's just over half. So a majority of Aboriginal women have non-Aboriginal partners, male partners. So it's but also that sort of individualism, particularly when it's coupled with substance abuse, etc. It's just poison for our culture and for our law. So people think they can get away with these things and circumvent collective shame, transparent sort of dispute resolution, and so there are horrendous things going on behind closed doors that have never ever been part of our culture. So I get it. I'm not standing on some moral high ground here going, oh, settlers are no good, because it's about this economic system that we're all laboring under together.
At the end of the street fight that you describe in the book, and then we'll go on to something else, but I thought it was interesting that there are two women, as you say. One woman's partner is holding the baby, kind of looking the other way, and then they are done, and you say there is no victor or loser. It's just resolved, whatever it was, and everyone disperses, and now we're done.
Yeah, well, they've expressed it. And they've both expressed it, and they've both maintained their dignity, and defended their autonomy, but at the same time in profound relation with each other and with all the people watching, all the families. They've both expressed that, and they both walk away with their heads held high. both the transgressor and the victim of the transgression, and that's done. Finish.
And that's
The lady takes a baby back off her partner and walks away and continues to care for that infant, and nurture it. It's that was just I don't know. That was just an example that I thought was, I think it was the baby that made that story the one to share,
absolutely.
because there's plenty of them, but it was the baby, and it was just that the man was holding the baby, or had the baby in the pram, like just a few meters away, and there was never a sense that the fight would get out of control, and that maybe someone would fall into the pram, or that the baby would become collateral damage in this. Is very disciplined. They're both standing, feet planted and not moving, and just duking it out for a bit, and then it was done. It's that discipline and control, and and particularly the collective governance around it that makes sure there's no collateral damage there, because you can't have that. I tell you, in the street fight videos we watched from around the world, there was a lot of collateral damage. there was a lot of bystanders getting hurt, or getting hit or knocked down, but that's a huge no-no in our community.
So do you want to tell us what is happening? I hate to skip over just having you tell us what is happening in Australia now and Indigenous communities that we should be aware of.
Well, it's like everywhere. There are structural problems that aren't really being addressed, and a lot of people are talking about structural racism but not really knowing what that is. People not actually seeing the systems and structures and the mechanisms that drive these things, and they assume that it's somehow like that invisible hand thing, this aggregate of individual bad opinions and prejudices is somehow creating this big sort of demon of racism, and that if we could just train everybody, if we could just inform everybody, if everybody knew, if everybody changed their language and the way they talk about things, if we could just stop that uncle who says weird stuff after the third beer, if we can, that somehow it's democratic racism, that, and if we can just reach enough people and make them not racist anymore, then that's the systemic racism that would go away. And it's like, well, no, that's not it. Everybody's in this economic system that demands inequality just to function. And you have to have a certain number of people who are unemployed and struggling, or the whole system doesn't work. So people say things like, oh, we should fund universal employment, so everybody who wants to work can work. But that they're definitely not economists, people who are saying that, because what happens when there's really low or even zero unemployment, and immediately that means inflation goes through the roof, and so that has to be adjusted for. So you increase interest rates, because when you increase interest rates, then you also increase unemployment. And when you can increase unemployment, then inflation gets under control again. There are mechanisms in this economic system that demand inequality, that demand that there are increasing numbers of people suffering. You can't price anything without pricing mechanisms based on limitability and excludability. It's how much you can limit and create an artificial scarcity for that item, and then whom you can exclude. So you need outsiders, you need marginalized people, you need people who are suffering and not getting the basics that they need to survive in order for your system to function. That's the source of structural inequality. It's It's the economic system itself, and that's what we need to be looking at. So, but like everywhere else in Aboriginal Australia, we're thinking that, you know, if we can just, you know, get to the individual attitudes of, you know, 21 million people and change their individual attitudes, improve the way they speak, or, you know, center Indigenous voices. You know, at the moment, there's a big push to get an Aboriginal voice, a group into Parliament, so that there's a voice to Parliament. You know, all these things, and these are empowering things and good things, but they're not doing what they claim to do, which is, you know, addressing structural inequality. That's a whole different kettle of fish, from my perspective anyway. But I've got a weird perspective, and I'm not. My perspective isn't representative of everyone else in my community.
Why is
It's
that?
just, well, I guess because I study the systems and structures of things. We've had an intellectual tradition in Australian Aboriginal scholarship for 30 years that's grounded in post-structuralism, which means ignoring the structures and just looking at discourse. You know, that sort of postmodern idea, deconstructivist idea that nothing exists outside of the text, and that if you can change the discourse, you change the reality. So we've been doing that for 30 years. I've spent most of my academic life doing that, but yeah, I guess over the last 5 or 10 years, I've been looking closer at the systems and structures, and, you know, the complexity of things, and trying to find the actual leverage points for change, which are, you know, they're seldom about the thing. You don't, it's like in good poetry, you never say the thing, you know. You know, you don't go, oh, you know, the white man is, you know, is killing us, is trapping us. You don't say that in a poem. A lot of our poets are rubbish because they say the thing, you know. So you see this all around the world at the moment. Artists and poets, they're not doing art, they're just saying the thing. But you don't say it like that. You write a poem about an emu trapped in a barbed wire fence. You know, it's in there. It's in the metaphor. It's supposed to be, you know, an analogy. You're supposed to be able to find the message and interpret the message yourself with art. And I guess
Well, it
it's, you know,
bypasses our left brain when it's
yeah, but it's the
goes
same
there.
thing when you're looking at complexity in systems. It's never just direct the thing. Address racism. All right, we have an anti-racism campaign. We put up posters saying "Don't be racist," and I don't know, some more posters on the wall that's celebrating, you know, women in hijabs, and, you know, we talk about inclusivity, and we'll put it in our reconciliation action plan. You know, item number 3.2, you know, inclusivity, diversity. We'll say these words, we'll change the discourse, and it'll change the reality. It's like, no. So I mean, so I advised a bank that was having trouble with its gendered pay gap. You know, there was still a massive pay gap with women in this big bank, you know, in Australia, and they were asking my lab advice from an Indigenous complexity perspective of how we could change that. You know, how we could, because all of their programs weren't working. They were doing all those things. They had the posters, they had, you know, memos going around, they had, you know, outcomes to report against, you know, to hire more women and to, you know, promote more women, and it just wasn't working. So I drew their attention to the Uber data, and I was saying, look, even at Uber, where everybody's self-managed and people just drive however much they want to drive, work however much they want to work, there's still a pay gap there, a gendered pay gap. And when you analyze all that data, you find that the key variable is risk-taking behavior. Uber rewards risk-taking behavior. And males are more likely to take more horrendous risks and drive to the dodgy part of town where everyone's drunk and fighting, and do a pickup or do a drop-off. You know, they're more likely to pick up the dodgy fella who might want to kill them and put them in the trunk. you know so they yeah and so there's a gendered pay gap, and I'm saying in banking, in finance, it's the same thing. In commerce generally, the current system is rewarding risk-taking behavior. You roll the dice, and if it pays off for you, then you show a massive leap in your quarterly report and you get promoted. You can demand a raise, or if you do that successfully enough times and you don't get caught laundering Russian oligarch money, or money for pedophile rings or whatever, which this bank had been doing and been caught recently doing. If you address your culture of high risk, rewarding high risk in your organization, then you'll find that the gender inequality will sort itself out. If you're rewarding, more careful, long-term investment thinking, if you're rewarding caution rather than risk-taking, then you'll find you've got a bunch of female execs in no time. You'll find you've got heaps more, female hires. You don't have to mention it. You can't just blunder directly at the problem as you see it. You need to find out what's causing the problem, and you need to address that. And it's like in good poetry, you don't say the frickin' thing. Don't say the thing. Because the thing is not the thing. Yeah.
Is there a value shift possible in places like this that are so institutional and traditionally patriarchal that they're going to suddenly shift their value? That sounds like a value shift.
Yeah, I don't think so. They did not take the advice, and they probably should have, but instead they weathered the storm of bad publicity, around laundering money for horrendous oligarchs and the Russian mafia and bloody and pedophile rings and human trafficking and just the worst stuff you could imagine. They just sort of weathered the storm of that scandal. Other people might call it a crime, that one, but anyway, it's just a scandal, and now everyone's forgotten about it. So business as usual. Women aren't going to be promoted because they're not going to go out there and act like dogs. As a general rule, women are less likely to behave like a freaking dog and deliberately do harm in the world to advance themselves, and they're not going to take a massive risk and roll the dice and potentially be homeless the following week, because it's a hell of a lot harder for a woman on the street. But a man will take that risk. Men are encouraged from birth to take that risk, and that's part of being in the patriarchy. And I guess the entire economic system has developed around that sort of that patriarchy and that training that men get from birth to be that sort of lone wolf in the world, and to be ultimately disposable. That's the flip side of it. It's not good individually for men. This privilege comes with a price, because so you foster all this rampant lone wolf individualism. The entire society's set up for it. Try be a parent with an infant, and use public spaces. It's very freaking hard. It's not built for families and for children, and it's hostile to the mother. It's hostile to the parent. But the whole city is set up for a minority of people, which is the single, unattached, able-bodied male. So everything's set up for you if you're this thing. It's all there for you. The whole society's built for you. But the flip side of that is one day, you're going to need somebody to wipe your ass for you. One day you're going to be frail and infirm, and there'll be nobody there for you. You haven't cared for others, and there will be nobody to care for you, and you will die on the side of the road in the rain. So there's this kind of, I don't know, this weird kind of death wish that these individual males have in this patriarchy. There's this idea too that if you gather enough resources together, if you gather enough millions of dollars, that you can just pay for people to care for you when you need that. You know, you can pay for intimacy when you want that intimacy. But it's a shallow, hollow freaking existence. It's a horrendous system, a horrible way to live. And it's not a culture, you know, it's not like, you can't even say that it's Anglo culture, this thing, you know, because it's not. You know, it's an economic imperative that's to divide everybody into individuals. Anglo culture is actually really cohesive, you know, the actual culture itself. If you talk to an Angle from, you know, just a few hundred years ago, and you showed him what is Anglo culture, what people are calling Anglo culture today, he'd be like, oh, that's shame, that's terrible. That's not how we do things. You know, even those bloody weird Vikings back in the day, they weren't, you know, rampant individuals. They were, you know, they were cohesive, collective. They were in extended families, and they had each other's back. It's this thing here, this contemporary culture of dog eat dog and every man for himself. This weird, you know, iteration of patriarchy it's not right from any historical or cultural perspective, and it's not the root culture of the people who are forced to uphold it either. That was a freaking rant. I'm sorry about that,
That's
Lisa.
awesome. No, I'll take it. I will.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
You could
There's so
probably cut
many.
like 5 minutes from that.
No, you know, it is I think the question of the day really, I know we're talking about, and I've heard you talk about social justice warriors and social identity in a way that just kind of dismiss them as distracting, you know, from the real issues. But I do wonder if we're ever going to turn our attention to white men who are killing themselves, have high suicide rates, and point out to them, you're just saying it appears the culture is built for you. No, it's not. Patriarchy doesn't work for men.
No.
So I don't, it feels like with your book and the receptivity to it and some of the other things we're doing on Indigenous Worldview at Kindred, the receptivity is growing to and a desire to understand a different way of being. You know, like, describe that to me. Or I know you say in the book you can't, you have to come with me out in the bush, and then maybe you'll absorb some of it. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's difficult to describe. It's difficult, like I say, to talk about it. It's easier to talk from it, and you can infer, like, you know, all of these things on these weird rants that I've been doing with you now. You can infer a lot from that. But, you know, yeah, look, I guess it's like the difference between, if I tell you the difference between Indigenous science and you know what they call Western science, which is just global science. It's just science. You know, it's just the smallest difference. So, you know, science is the intention of science, and what it's really good at is to be able to investigate everything in the universe. You can investigate and find out about everything in the universe, and that's it's just so wonderful. But you know, there's just a small difference with Indigenous science, which is it doesn't inquire into everything in the universe, but inquires into the relationships between all the things in the universe. It's about, you know, finding out what your relationship is with all the things in the universe, and then the relationships between all those things. So it sort of sees the relations rather than the things. I guess it comes back to the same thing I said before, don't say the thing. So it's not just looking at the objects and the phenomena, it's looking at the relationships and the systems that give rise to that phenomena. You know, that's yeah, and that's the key difference, I suppose. And I guess what the book is asking us to asking people to do is, you know, instead of you know, looking at Indigenous knowledge and looking at Indigenous culture, it's sort of inviting people to imagine looking out from Indigenous culture at the rest of the world, you know, and you know, adopting a few of those different ways. So, for example, like in your inquiry, including the variables of place and time, and things that you're investigating or learning about, and paying attention to place and time. So I think the example I give in the book is the fish oil studies. So you know how when you go to the chemist, you can get fish oil capsules, but there's a big disclaimer on the front that there's no scientific evidence that this works, or words to that effect. It's because they can't replicate the successful results of studies. So in one trial, it will completely reverse necrosis in the kidneys, and it'll be just amazing results. But in the next trial, there'll be almost no, because they'll do a controlled study, and they're controlling for a lot of variables. But in the end, they can't replicate the results from study to study. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's a mystery. But if they paid attention to the variables, place and time, like from an Aboriginal perspective, then they'd understand that where and when you harvest that fish oil is really important. So we know that the fish oil is only medicinal when you see the yellow flowers, on the tree at this river. When you see the yellow flowers in the trees, in the wattle trees, well, that's the month when that fish oil is medicinal. So that's when you harvest the fat. Then if you eat that fish or harvest the oil at any other time of the year, it doesn't do anything. That's not the right time. Yeah. So it really depends on the diet of those fish at specific times, and a lot of other phenomena going on in that seasonal knowledge. So where and when, just quite simply including those variables of time and place in your investigation, inquiry, and learning in general, you're completely shifting your perspective, and you're not having to buy like a rattle or a didgeridoo or a feather headdress, or do a sweat lodge, or any of these indigenous sort of material culture things, to have that indigenous perspective, because that's not where the knowledge is. Yeah. So, I think people like to have the things. They like to say the thing, but that's seldom where the wisdom is, or where the knowledge is. You can apply general patterns of thinking and cognition, though, that of thinking and being in relation. That will give you a really effective lens for inquiry in the world. It can just be a couple more arrows to add to your bow. Or is it strings to your bow? String to your bow. Is that an archery metaphor or a violin metaphor? I've never been able to figure it out.
I do not know. Probably maybe violin, because it's strings. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd need more than one string on a bow, like a bow and arrow bow. Anyway.
So let me I wanted to at least get to some of the double secret reasons that I wanted to talk to you before I let you go, which was I already when I first wrote to you, I said I heard you talking about nonprofits and activism, and I've seen so many people go out there and do things in the last 30 years, and then it just seems to be a big waste of time, and for a number of reasons. And especially the whole idea of holism, but we're still in linear thinking and time, and trying to make anything holistic, and how impossible that's going to be. And I wrote to you and said, okay, did I just waste my life? Because it kind of feels that way. What we didn't know when we started Kindred was 25 years ago, is that the United States was in the middle of a 50-year free fall to the bottom of all national indicators for wellness, but especially for women and children. And there are no family policies to support life, infant life, human life from the beginning here. So the really horrific statistics on that are pregnant mothers are most likely to die from domestic violence, murder, and new mothers are at a high risk for suicide. It's one of the leading causes of death. We have nothing here for mothers and babies. It is barbaric. So my purpose, and when I'm looking at your work, and I just wrote in my last editorial in our newsletter, our mission and vision, and how are we going to do this, and we keep trying to get the word out, keep trying to get people to care about
Yeah.
babies. And this in the book, you have the beautiful symbol of the dot in the middle.
Once a baby's born in your country, nobody gives a shit about it.
Nobody gives a shit. That's right. Nobody gives a shit.
No, they only care about it while it's in utero. Yeah.
And that's just controlling.
And they don't particularly care about it then either. It's just, that's just a beautiful way to make sure you can kill more women than COVID. By denying them appropriate care and everything else. I don't know. Maybe I'm just I don't know anything about you. Maybe you're a strong pro-lifer or something like that.
Nope.
But I don't care if you are. If you are, then there's I don't know. I've got this sort of radical inclusion thing about dialoguing with people. Well, I had that when I wrote Sand Talk. It's like, I'll talk to everybody. I'll talk to flat earthers. I'll talk to anybody, and you go and you have dialogue and you lift each other up. And I'm starting to revise that. Has to be limits to radical inclusion. Yeah, because some people just want to burn it all down, and it's like inviting a vampire into your freaking house sometimes. I don't know what those limits should be now, because I really do still believe in talking to everybody and that you have to reach out. But at the same time, I know there's a lot of jiu-jitsu going on out there ideologically, with sort of people seizing on that opportunity, to be included in public discourse. And sort of seize on that to legitimize some pretty horrendous stuff. And that's escalated to the point where so many people are being radicalized, particularly young men around the planet. So some very destructive ideologies that are killing people, are killing so many people, that are killing the earth. That it's, I don't know. I don't quite know what to do. I want to talk to everybody. I want to reach out to everybody, but I'm having to revise that opinion and think there has to be, ways to limit these things. There has to be limits to radical inclusion.
We say we are open to the seekers, trance breakers, wayfinders, and new cycle makers here at Kindred, because my codependent days of activism are over. I just cannot spend any more time trying to speak about, just basic biology. It doesn't have a political party. It's basic biological needs to people who are already, in Darsha's work and James Prescott's work. They show if you don't get that wiring laid down early on with nurturing, it doesn't form itself again over time. So it's just every conversation is that there's this horrendous thrusting strategic move that's done right at the start, where they just jump straight in and decide where the window is going to be, decide the limits to the thought or whatever's being discussed. It's like they jump straight in and go, I'm going to cut your arms and legs and your head off, and that's that's their position. And so yours is like, oh no, don't cut off my arms and legs and head. It's like, all right, well, I tell you what, we'll just cut off your arms. So there's the compromise. We've found the middle ground. That's the center. You know what I mean? So they open with the most extreme thing in order to arrive at, where they want to be in the framing of every single question, which aren't questions. They're not even questions. They managed to frame the entire debate so that the window is so far to the extreme radical right that that you are fighting just to arrive, at the right of center. And they've shifted everything there in that way. It's aggressive. It's weaponizing discourse. It's weaponizing, people's goodwill and good faith, against them. And that's how they're winning. That's how they're going to kill this planet.
that's how they managed to get a Supreme Court to vote against, preventing global warming. That's how they can they can do everything like that. And your island did that. It came out of your place. You guys let them do that. And you let them do that because you're decent fundamentally. And we'll take they take the low road, we take the high road. And I don't know, I've always thought that was admirable until I saw where it landed us all, because it's eating our world. All of those discourses and all of those pathologies have come here. America sets the cultural agenda for the world. It sets the limits of discourse.
And that's horrifying, because a lot of the science that's come out of the US on brain development, nurturing, how having these things built into our public policy and culture would have made us a different country. That science has been around for 80 years. It came out of the US. It's still coming out. It just never comes back in the form of public policy. It just can't get past all the hoops that are in place now. And the cultural bias now is way worse than it was 25 years ago against nurturing.
Davey has a.
I had to plug the computer back in and then run up and clean up a whole heap of shit. And,
yeah. Is he on the spectrum? I won't
put
this on again. I'll take it off.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I don't care. Look, I don't know if you've ever tried to change a 4-year-old autistic kid's nappy while he's fighting you like a wild dog.
No, but I used to cover
it's a tricky job.
Yes. When I used to cover when autism was really first becoming noticed in the 90s, I covered the issue on Washington DC for Mothering magazine, and then I went and sat in homes with families who were forming support groups, so I got to have a lot of experience with sitting with families and children, and exactly that. Everybody was just completely unfazed by it was constant, that kind of thing. I'm really sorry.
Look, I guess if it wasn't for him, I'd probably care more about how I sounded and looked, and it's just, most of my work is him, and the house. Like I'm mostly a house husband and carer. Like 75% of my work. Wow. Like the other 25% is trying to run this Indigenous Knowledge Systems lab at Deakin, and do all this research and write books. I've just finished the follow-up book to Sand Talk. So I kind of do that stuff at like 2:00 in the morning. But but it just means the last 3 years, I think, since Sand Talk came out, I've just been completely exhausted and just haven't got time for anything. And I don't know, when you get in that headspace, you don't really care what anyone thinks, or you don't really care what's coming out of your mouth, So I guess I've got him to thank for that, because I don't know, maybe nobody would have read the book if I wasn't sort of saying fuck on YouTube a lot, if I wasn't like, I don't know, saying weird, insane things, and people like, enjoying the spectacle of watching my public meltdowns and hearing
I love
weird
it.
rants.
I appreciate someone speaking truth and passion, and that
it's not a virtue though, it's just a symptom of fatigue in my case.
There are so many people who are traumatized and burned out by now, who are beyond the capacity to continue to be passionate and try to get people to listen and set their hair on fire with stories of calling the deer out from the land and having it for dinner with vegans. I love you for that, and thank you very much for your work. I do want to end though on you telling everyone the good news, which I feel like is good news, and that is you do have an Indigenous lab organization, company going in Australia that's helping to carry your work out there. And you were just talking earlier about how you're actually working with institutions like banks. So do you think how's that going?
It's just really exciting work. Yeah, it's just we're quite limited on it. So that we've only got like we've only got 5 people in the lab, so there's only so much we can do. So and we're basically universities are hard places for funding and stuff like that at the moment. After COVID, which nobody wants to say it's because they lost most of the international student business, and so unis like took a real hard hit financially. So yeah, we're existing on donors, like donor support. There's a few people in finance around the world who can sort of see the exciting sort of value in what we're doing and applying Indigenous methods of inquiry to solve complex problems in the world. So we're doing a fair bit of work for impact investing and stuff like that. And it's, I don't know, it's really exciting work. It's really exciting that it even exists. But yeah, we need to get more researchers, more fellows, and we need to have more bodies in the lab to be able to supervise more PhD students coming through as well, who and sort of do a bit of a pipeline to create heaps more Indigenous systems thinkers in the world, and quite urgently, so that there will be boots on the ground in the complexity mess over the next 5 years, because I think we got about a decade to try and sort out a lot of these problems before it just eats us all. Yeah. So yeah, it's urgent work, but it's good work, and we've had a bit of had some donors help us get started up and get the work rolling. But yeah, we certainly need more support in that way.
Okay, so what I'll do is put resources at the bottom of wherever our listeners are listening to this podcast, so you can visit Tyson over at the labs, and we'll put a couple of other things down there for you to follow
Sweet.
up on. Thank you
Yeah,
much again for coming on and talking with us. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you so much.